Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of Vehicles of War Thunder. Sorry this video is a little bit on the late side, as I had mentioned in some of the other videos that I upload to my channel, as well as in my Discord for those of you that are in it. I was going to be going through a move sometime around the end of May or early June. That ended up taking longer than anticipated, and I'm still sort of dealing with unpacking and whatnot. But I've got a bit of a setup going now, so I can start trying to get some videos at least. So let's return to the actual topic of this video. So we've done several American vehicles recently, so I decided we should mix things up a little bit. So it's been a little while since I've covered a Japanese tank, so I figured let's go ahead and do that. This time we're going to be covering the Type 89 Igo. The Type 89 evolved from what was Japan's first domestic tank project that was initiated by the Imperial Japanese Army's Osaka Technical Arsenal in 1925. The original plan was to design two different types of tanks. The first would be a light tank weighing in at 10 tons based on the French Renault FT tank, with the second being a 20-ton design modeled on the British Vickers medium tank. By February 1927, the design for what would be the Type 87 Chi, probably mispronouncing that, was ready for its trials. The tank would be found to be too heavy for its intended role as a light tank though, weighing in at 20 tons and being underpowered. This tank did not impress the Imperial Japanese Army's General Staff Office, who issued a new requirement for a light tank with a nominal 10 short ton weight. The new design would be based on the Vickers Medium C that the Japanese Army had bought in March 1927. By 1929, the prototype of the Type 89 light tank was completed and designated as the Type 89 Chiro. The 89 number designation stemmed from 1929 being the year 2589 in the Japanese imperial calendar. The tank would later be reclassified as a medium tank because the weight increased to 12.8 tons due to various improvements. Because the Imperial Japanese Army's Sagami Arsenal lacked the production capacity to mass-produce the tank, a contract was instead awarded to Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, who built a new tank factory specifically to produce this model, with production of the tank beginning in 1931. The Type 89 was well regarded by the Army, but early models did suffer from several problems, including a gap under the mantlet on early models that allowed rifle fire to enter the turret. The tank had a fairly conventional design and layout for a tank designed in the late 1920s and produced in the early 1930s. The tank contained a crew of 4 in cramped conditions. The crew consisted of a commander, gunner, bow gunner, and driver. The driver and bow gunner maintained positions at the front of the hull. The commander and gunner resided in the forward set turret. The engine was in the rear, noted by a right rear mounted exhaust, as well as the drive sprocket. The track idler was located at the front with 9 road wheels set low along the track, and no fewer than 4 track return rollers were present along the upper portion of the track. The tank presented a nose-up appearance when at rest, which served the tank fairly well when traversing uneven terrain. The turret had slanted armor plating with minimal ballistics, with later models having a circular commander's cupola. The main armament was a Type 90 57mm gun with a barrel length of 33 inches, a gun depression of -15 degrees to +20 degrees, and a muzzle velocity of 380 meters a second, and was able to penetrate 20 millimeters of armor at 500 meters. In the later stages of World War II, heat shells would eventually be developed that would provide greater penetration against enemy armor. The main gun was complemented by 2 Type 91 6.5mm machine guns, with one placed in the front hull and the other located in a turret ball mount pointed towards the rear, a practice used on many Japanese tanks of this era as well as some other countries. The Type 89 first saw combat during the First Battle of Shanghai in 1932 as part of the Japanese infantry divisions. The short-barreled 57mm gun proved effective, destroying machine gun nests, and while its 6 to 17 millimeters of armor was thin, provided it enough to stop small arms fire. With this type of operation, the tank engaged at a low speed of 16 miles per hour or 25 kilometers an hour wasn't an issue. In 1933, the Japanese Army would form its first independent armor force by creating 3 regiments equipped with the Type 89. Each consisted of 2 companies with 10 tanks each. The 3 more regiments would then be formed in 1934. The tank would be used as part of infantry support operations during the Second Sino-Japanese War and various campaigns after 1937. Once war with China broke out, the peacetime budgetary limitations were removed and the more capable and expensive Mitsubishi Chi-Ha was accepted as the new Type 97 medium tank and began to replace the Type 89. Despite this, the Type 89 was still in use during the Battle of Khalkhin Gol, and even later in 1942 during the Battle of the Philippines and Battle of Malaya and the Burma campaign. There are 2 variants of this tank that were actually produced and used. The first is the Type 89A Igo Otsu, which used a 100 horsepower 6-cylinder gasoline engine and mounted a machine gun on the right side of the hull. This model had a top speed of 15.5 kilometers an hour and was limited by the severe winter climate in northern China. 113 units of this model were produced. The second variant produced was the Type 89B Igo Otsu. It entered production in 1934. The Type 89B was powered by an air-cooled Mitsubishi A6120VD 120 horsepower diesel engine. This model had a new asymmetric-shaped gun turret, complete with a commander's cupola, and the whole machine gun was relocated to the left side of the hull. The multiple armor plates on the front hull were replaced with a single shallow-sloped frontal armor plate, which provided better protection for the driver. The use of a diesel engine came with several advantages: lower vulnerability to fire than a gasoline engine, better fuel economy, and greater torque at lower revolutions. The diesel engine was also preferred by the Japanese army because more diesel fuel could be produced per barrel of oil compared to gasoline. This model was the first mass-produced tank with a diesel engine. Finally, 291 units for this model were produced. As far as I can tell, there are 4 survivors of this tank. One is located at the Ordnance Training Support Facility at Fort Lee, Virginia, which is labeled as a Type 89 Chi-Ro. Another is located at the Japanese Ground Self-Defense Force base at Tsuchihara, Ibaraki, Japan, and was restored to running condition. Another is also in Japan at Shinbudai Old Weapon Museum at Camp Asaka. The last is located at Villa Escondero Tiago, Quinzon Province, Philippines. I probably butchered that, I can say that right now. Now for how this tank actually performs in-game. I would say this is easily the worst reserve tank in the game. The tank is slow, has papier-mâché armor, and cramped crew layout that makes you an easy one-shot if someone has any half-decent ammo with an explosive filler. Heck, with such thin armor, some HE shells can potentially even penetrate you with ease, and even if they don't, with the new overpressure mechanic, it's possible that you can just die from overpressure. Potentially. However, the tank is not all bad. Its gun, even though it isn't the greatest for this battle rating, or rather, the only thing that is any good about this tank, in my opinion, would be its gun, and even that isn't the greatest for this battle rating. You have 2 choices of ammo, and APHE and a heat. The heat is the only one of the 2 that's really worth using, and while it's good, it doesn't always deliver consistent results that a decent APHE or APCBC with explosive filler shell would be able to provide. From playing other Japanese tanks, I'm only at Tier 2 right now, though fairly close to Tier 3. I don't actually play Japanese tanks all that often. I find myself not particularly enjoying them. I find that they're often too slow, don't have particularly good armor, don't have particularly good guns, and don't have particularly good ammo. Really, all in all, at least with these early tanks, I struggle to find anything particularly good about any of them. This actually seems to be a fairly common occurrence, as I was just sort of highlighting. They're, like I said, usually lightly armored, aren't all that fast compared to other tanks of their battle rating that other nations have, and many of which are also better than the Japanese tank and don't seem to have particularly good guns. Either the shell options that are available aren't that good, limiting you largely to APHE or heat, or the muzzle velocity is so low that trying to hit any that isn't basically right next to you is an exercise in futility. Now, that isn't to say that all Japanese tanks are bad. They have some that are actually fairly decent, especially with the new overpressure mechanic, namely the ones that have stupidly big guns and rely largely on using high explosive to be able to kill shit with using the overpressure from the explosion. But that doesn't really exist with everything, because at the end of the day, a lot of their tanks don't actually have aren't like that for these early tanks. Like I said, a lot of them you are limited, from what I can tell, to APHE or heat. And often if you switch to heat, you actually have a lower muzzle velocity in some cases, but at least you're more likely to be able to kill things, or at least pen them. You may not be able to kill them easily though. So, in my opinion, Japan is probably one of the worst nations when it comes to their tanks, at least, to get into, compared to many other countries. They don't have, like I said, particularly good tanks, in my opinion. Italian tanks are slow, but they have fairly decent armor, and they have fairly decent guns. French tanks, I will admit, I'm not too big on either. I find that they are often very slow, don't have particularly good guns or ammo either, but they're often decently armored, so they're a little bit harder to penetrate in some cases, at least. Germans typically have a fairly decent mix of speed, armor, and decent gun and ammo options. American tanks, I find, are also generally fairly similar. It's been a while since I did that one video on the British A13 Mark I, and since I've played some British tanks against somewhat recently, it's been a good couple of months now since then, but either way, I find that they are better than they were then. I think at some point Gaijin made some changes to how solid AP shells fragment when they pen, and it actually makes those solid AP that you're pretty much limited to with large portions of the British tech tree actually pretty decent. But yeah, Japanese tanks are not that great, and China's not a whole lot better because their tanks are generally either Soviet, American, or Japanese tanks. And in the case of Japanese ones, I'm assuming those are supposed to be captured tanks. I haven't really messed around too much with Sweden, so I can't really say how those are. And of course, Soviet tanks are typically pretty fast, have fairly decent armor and guns. Japan is, in my opinion, the country that is in the absolute worst position of any country in the game when it comes to starting out with their tanks. Their aircraft are pretty decent, in my opinion, and we'll get into that when we start covering some of their aircraft in the relative near future, I imagine. But their tanks, they leave something to be desired. They really do, compared to many of the other tanks in-game. I don't really have anything else to say about the tank, so I'm going to go ahead and leave you all here. I will see you all next time. Quick reminder, I do have a Patreon and a Discord. You can find links to those down below in the description. I do highly recommend that you join the Discord so that you can stay updated on channel happenings, because that is my go-to place. Sometimes I'll remember or care enough to go and actually post in the YouTube community section or over on like Twitter or something, but the vast majority of times I don't. So I do highly recommend that you join the Discord. You don't have to be active. You can join it and mute the server and just periodically check and see if I make a post in my announcement channel there, so that you can stay up to date. That's up to you. But again, I do highly recommend that you join it just so you can stay up to date. As for Patreon, that is the best way to help support the channel. If you find yourself enjoying this content, it allows me to be able to go ahead and cover the costs of buying games, or in the case of War Thunder, being able to afford to buy either the Golden Eagles necessary to buy some of the premium vehicles for anything that doesn't have like a tech tree variant, or for me to be able to go ahead and buy vehicle packs for those instances where, again, there's no tech tree variant in some cases. But yeah, so that'll be it for this video. Like I said, I will see you all next time, where we will be covering something. I'm not 100% certain. I've got a number of vehicles that I've written out some scripts for, but I haven't really finished them, because most of them I still need to do the how does this vehicle handle in game portion. And there's still one vehicle that I can't really finish the script for until I have the version of the vehicle that's in the battle pass. By the time this video goes up, I'll probably have it, but as of right this second, I don't. But yeah, so I will see you all next time, but until then, a goodbye and farewell.